My head pounded like someone was using my skull for drum practice as I pulled into our neighborhood 3 hours earlier than usual. The migraine had come on suddenly during my presentation, forcing mumbled apologies to clients as I gathered my papers and fled the conference room. Now all I wanted was darkness, silence, and maybe one of those prescription pills Melanie kept in the medicine cabinet. I frowned as I approached our driveway. A sleek black BMW I didn't recognize was parked there, gleaming in the afternoon sun. Melanie hadn't mentioned expecting visitors. Her brother Scott's beaten-up Chevy was nowhere near this nice, and her friends typically drove SUVs appropriate for their growing families. I parked on the street, wincing as the car door thudded shut behind me. The sound seemed to reverberate through my aching skull. Walking toward our front door, I fished my keys from my pocket, then hesitated. Through the large bay window I could see movement in the kitchen. Something made me pause. Perhaps it was instinct, or maybe the unfamiliar car had set off warning bells. Instead of using my keys, I tried the front door handle. It opened silently. I stepped inside, the plush carpet muffling my footsteps. Voices drifted from the kitchen. Melanie's familiar lilting tone and a deeper male voice I recognized as Scott's. The BMW definitely wasn't his style. "You've got to help me, Mel. 20,000 should cover it," Scott was saying, his voice tense but familiar. "These aren't the kind of guys you can just blow off." I froze in the hallway, my migraine momentarily forgotten. $20,000? What kind of trouble was Scott in now? "Jesus, Scott," Melanie sighed, exasperation clear in her voice. "That's a lot of money. But fine. I'll transfer it from our joint account tomorrow." Our joint account. The one we'd been building for the past 5 years for a down payment on a bigger house. The one that had just passed 80,000 after years of careful saving and investment. "You're a lifesaver, sis. Literally in this case." Scott chuckled, and I heard the distinctive sound of a refrigerator opening, followed by the hiss of a beer can. "It's not like this is the first time anyway, right?" "Not the first time?" My stomach twisted into a knot. "Keep your voice down," Melanie hissed. "Liam doesn't need to know about any of this. I'll tell him we needed the money for some house repairs or something." I leaned against the wall, legs suddenly unsteady beneath me. Melanie had been taking money from our account before? And lying to me about it? "Good old Liam," Scott said, his voice dripping with contempt. "The human ATM who never asks questions." To my shock, Melanie laughed. "Stop it. He's a good guy." "A good guy who's completely clueless," Scott replied. "Oh, by the way, I've been thinking about your situation. I think it's time you and the kids moved in with me. That house of yours is way too small." "Kids? We didn't have children yet." Melanie had been adamant about waiting until we were more financially stable. "Scott, we've talked about this," Melanie whispered, her voice so low I had to strain to hear. "It's complicated." "Only because you make it complicated," he responded. "But we'll figure it out. We always do." My migraine pulsed behind my eyes as pieces began falling into place. The late nights at work. The weekends visiting her sick friend. The emotional distance that had been growing between us for months. I backed away from the kitchen doorway, careful not to make a sound. My heart hammered in my chest as I silently retreated through the front door, closing it with agonizing slowness to prevent any noise. Back in my car, I sat staring at our house. The house I'd worked 60-hour weeks to afford, the house I'd painted myself to save money, the house that now felt like a theater set for a play I didn't know I was performing in. I started the engine and drove away, my mind racing faster than the car. My marriage, it seemed, had been built on a foundation of lies. The woman I'd loved, trusted, and planned a future with was systematically robbing me while her brother, or whoever Scott really was, mocked me behind my back. That night, I checked into a roadside motel, ignoring the dozen increasingly frantic texts and calls from Melanie. As I lay on the lumpy mattress staring at water stains on the ceiling, I made a decision. I wouldn't confront her. Not yet. First, I needed to know exactly what I was dealing with. Morning light filtered through the thin motel curtains, waking me from a fitful sleep. My phone showed 17 missed calls from Melanie and a string of increasingly panicked text messages. "Where are you? Are you okay? Please call me, I'm worried sick. Liam, what's happening? Please just let me know you're alive." I texted back a brief reply, "Need some time. I'm fine." Then I called my office and requested a personal day, something I hadn't done in 3 years. By 9, I was sitting across from Patricia Wilson, the manager at our local bank branch. She greeted me with a warm smile that faded as I explained what I needed. "I'd like to see the complete transaction history for our joint account," I said, sliding my ID across her desk. All withdrawals and transfers for the past 3 years. Patricia's fingers clicked across her keyboard. Any particular reason, Mr. Reeves? Usually both account holders would be present for this kind of review. Just doing some financial planning, I lied, my voice surprisingly steady. Melanie's too busy at work to come in. 20 minutes later, I sat alone in a small conference room, staring at the stack of statements Patricia had printed for me. My hands trembled slightly as I began to sort through them. It didn't take long to find the pattern. Every 2 to 3 months, large withdrawals appeared, 5,000 here, 8,000 there, all authorized by Melanie. The descriptions varied: home renovation fund, investment opportunity, family emergency loan. I made notes, calculating quickly. Over 3 years, the total came to $85,000. Nearly everything we'd saved. Would you like some water, Mr. Reeves? Patricia appeared at the doorway, concern evident in her expression. I realized I'd been sitting there for over an hour, papers spread around me like the aftermath of a storm. No, thank you. But I do have another question. Our mortgage, who exactly is listed on it? She excused herself and returned moments later with another folder. The house is solely in your name, Mr. Reeves. Miss Thompson isn't on the deed or mortgage. I thanked her, collected the papers, and walked out into the bright morning sunlight feeling strangely calm. The betrayal was so complete, so thorough, that it had moved beyond pain into something almost like curiosity. How deep did this deception go? My next stop was Mark Jennings' office. Mark had been my college roommate and was now our financial advisor. His secretary gave me a concerned look as I walked in without an appointment, but Mark waved me into his office immediately. Liam, what brings you by? Everything okay? You look like hell, man. I dropped the bank statements on his desk. Did you know about this? Mark's expression shifted from surprise to discomfort as he glanced through the papers. I noticed some unusual activity. Melanie explained they were investments you both had agreed on. Some real estate opportunity her brother found. He ran a hand through his thinning hair. She said you were too busy to handle the paperwork, so she was managing it. And you believed her? She's your wife, Liam. Mark looked genuinely distressed. Why wouldn't I? I left Mark's office with a heaviness in my chest that had nothing to do with the previous day's migraine. On impulse, I called a number I'd found online that morning for Archer Investigations. Daniel Archer agreed to meet me for lunch at a diner far from my usual haunts. He was younger than I expected, maybe early 30s, with sharp eyes that seemed to catalog everything about me in seconds. So you want to know about your brother-in-law? He summarized after I explained the situation. Financial background, activities, possible legal issues? Everything, I said. And I need it fast. Archer nodded, typing notes on his tablet. What's his full name? Scott Thompson. Any idea where he lives? I realized with a start that I didn't know. In 5 years of marriage, I'd never been to Scott's place. He always came to ours or we met at Melanie's parents' home. Start with this, I said, sliding him the BMW's license plate number I'd memorized yesterday. And look into any connection between him and identity theft or credit fraud. I have a feeling. My phone buzzed with another call from Melanie. I declined it and sent another text. Need time. We'll be back when I'm ready. You're not confronting her yet, Archer observed. Smart move. I looked up at him. I need to know exactly what I'm dealing with first. And what then? He asked. I stared out the diner window watching people walk past, living their normal, honest lives. Then I make a plan. On my way out of the diner, I called a real estate agent whose billboard I'd passed and arranged to see apartments available for immediate occupancy. By evening, I had signed a month-to-month lease on a sparsely furnished one-bedroom unit 20 miles from our house. As I sat on the stiff mattress in my temporary home, I made one final call, to Alan Barnes, a divorce attorney whose name I'd found through a quick online search. I need to understand my options, I told his voicemail. And I need to know how to protect myself. 3 days of silence was all I could manage before the practical reality set in. I needed clothes. I needed my laptop. And most importantly, I needed to return home to set my plan in motion. I pulled into our driveway at 7 in the evening, rehearsing the lies I would tell. The moment I stepped through the door, Melanie rushed at me from the kitchen, her face a complicated mixture of relief, anger, and something else. Fear, perhaps? Where the hell have you been? She demanded, arms crossed tightly across her chest. I've been worried sick. I almost called the police. I forced a tired smile. I'm sorry. I just needed some space. Work stress hit me hard and I couldn't face anything for a while. I rubbed my temples for effect. That migraine turned into a full breakdown. I checked into a hotel, turned off my phone, and just slept for days. Her expression softened instantly, concern replacing anger. She reached out to touch my face. "Oh honey, why didn't you just tell me? I could have helped." The tenderness in her voice made my stomach turn. How easily the lies flowed between us now from both directions. "I wasn't thinking clearly," I said, allowing her to pull me into an embrace. Over her shoulder, I noticed Scott emerging from our living room, beer in hand. "Well, look who decided to come back," he said with a tight smile. "We were starting to think you'd run off with a secretary or something." I forced a laugh. Just needed to clear my head. Melanie pulled back, her eyes searching mine. Finding nothing suspicious, she smiled. "Well, you're just in time. Mom and Dad are coming over for dinner and Scott has some news." 2 hours later, I sat at our dining table, pushing food around my plate as Melanie's parents, Tom and Marjorie Thompson, dominated the conversation with stories about their recent cruise. Scott kept refilling his wine glass, while Melanie shot him nervous glances. Finally, as Marjorie paused for breath, Melanie cleared her throat. "So, we have some news," she announced, smiling brightly. "Scott is going to be moving in with us for a while. And the kids, of course." I nearly choked on my water. "Kids?" I managed to ask. "My neighbor's children," Scott explained smoothly. "I've been watching them since their mother passed. They're practically family now." Melanie nodded enthusiastically. "They need a proper family environment and we have the space. It's already decided." I looked around the table at 4 expectant faces, all watching for my reaction. With a deliberate effort, I arranged my features into what I hoped was a convincing smile. "That sounds wonderful," I lied, hating how easily the words came. "How many children?" "2, Scott replied. "Boys. 7 and 9. Tom raised his glass. "To family, taking care of family. That's what it's all about." As everyone clinked glasses, I calculated rapidly. This accelerated my timeline significantly. After dinner, as Melanie and her mother cleared the dishes, Tom cornered me in the hallway. He placed a heavy hand on my shoulder, his cologne suffocating in the small space. "Man to man, Liam," he said, voice low and confidential. "I know this might seem sudden, but it's important to Melanie. Very important. And in a marriage we sometimes need to know our place. Understand?" I nodded, the perfect picture of submission. "Of course, Tom. Family first." He patted my cheek patronizingly. "Good man. I always said Melanie chose well." Marjorie caught me next as I tried to escape to the bathroom. Her grip on my arm was surprisingly strong for a woman her age. "Liam, dear, I just want to say how proud I am of you for making the right decision about Scott and those poor children. Not every man would be so understanding." I smiled tightly. "I only want what's best for everyone." Later, as Melanie's parents prepared to leave, Scott sidled up to me with a smirk. "We should grab a drink soon, brother. Celebrate the new arrangement." "Absolutely," I agreed, returning his smile with one of my own. "Looking forward to it." The moment their cars disappeared down the street, I excused myself to shower. Instead, I locked the bathroom door and made a call to Jason Miller, a realtor whose number I'd stored in my phone days earlier. "Can you move quickly?" I whispered. "I need to sell and I need it done within 2 weeks. Below market value if necessary." "That's extremely fast," Jason replied, hesitation clear in his voice. "Your wife is on board with this?" I pulled an old power of attorney form from my wallet, one Melanie had signed years ago when I handled the house purchase while she was away. "She will be. Just get me the papers tomorrow." After hanging up, I methodically moved through the house, mentally cataloging my truly important possessions. The signed first edition books my grandfather left me. The antique watch. The external hard drive containing years of photographs and documents. Personal items that could fit in a single suitcase. As I rejoined Melanie in the living room, she smiled up at me, patting the couch beside her. "I'm so glad you're taking this well," she said, reaching for my hand. "It means everything to me." I squeezed her fingers gently. "Anything for you," I replied, and for the first time in days I spoke the absolute truth. The morning meeting was supposed to be routine. Quarterly projections, client updates, the usual Monday monotony. I sat in the conference room half listening, my mind occupied with the meeting I'd had with Jason the realtor before work. The paperwork was ready, I just needed to find the right moment to forge Melanie's signature. "Liam? Did you hear what I said?" I looked up to find Robert Davidson, our CEO, staring at me expectantly. The entire room had fallen silent. "I'm sorry, could you repeat that?" I asked, straightening in my chair. Robert's stern expression softened slightly. I said, we'd like you to consider taking the position in Boston. Senior VP of Operations. It would mean a 40% increase in your current salary, plus relocation benefits. I blinked, certain I'd misheard. Boston? There's an opening? Created specifically for you, Robert replied. Your work on the Harrison merger impressed the board. They think you're the right person to oversee our East Coast expansion. The room swam slightly before my eyes. A fresh start, 300 miles away with a substantial raise. It seemed too perfect, too convenient. There is one complication, Robert continued, his voice dropping. We need you there within 30 days. The new office opens next month, and they need leadership in place immediately. I understand, I said, finding my voice. When do you need my decision? By Friday, Robert replied. Oh, and Liam? This was nearly derailed. Someone called last week suggesting we consider Gregory Peters instead. Said you were having personal issues that might affect your performance. My blood ran cold. Who called? Robert shrugged. Anonymous. But they seem to know a lot about you. After the meeting, Robert's assistant handed me a folder with the details of the Boston position. I locked myself in my office and spread the papers across my desk, staring at them in disbelief. This was exactly what I needed, a legitimate reason to leave town quickly. During my lunch break, I called Daniel Archer. I need you to find out if my father-in-law, Thomas Thompson, has any connections to my company, I said without preamble. Archer didn't seem surprised by the request. I was going to call you today anyway. I've got preliminary information on Scott Thompson. It's interesting. He's got a history of gambling problems and 2 arrests for fraud, though the charges were dropped both times. And that BMW? Leased under a company name that doesn't exist. And my credit check? That's the kicker, Archer replied. Someone using your identity took out a loan for $30,000 6 months ago. The payments were made for the first 3 months, then stopped. It's in collections now. I closed my eyes, leaning back in my chair. So that's why I was denied that credit card increase last month. Your credit score has taken a serious hit, Archer confirmed. I'll need a few more days to connect all the dots, but it looks like your brother-in-law has been using your information for more than just that loan. As I hung up, a knock sounded at my office door. I quickly gathered the Boston papers into a folder and called, "Come in." The door opened to reveal a woman with short dark hair and familiar green eyes. It took me a moment to place her. Emily? I said, standing. Emily Winters? She smiled. It's Emily Castillo now, but yes. I heard you were working here. She stepped into my office, closing the door behind her. I hope you don't mind the surprise. I'm in town for a conference and thought I'd say hello to an old friend. Emily and I had been close in college before Melanie. Seeing her now sent a wave of nostalgia through me, memories of late-night study sessions and endless philosophical debates. We went to a cafe across the street, and as we settled into a corner table, Emily studied me with a thoughtful expression. You look strained, she said finally. Everything okay? Perhaps it was the events of the past week, or maybe it was seeing a face from a simpler time, but suddenly the whole story came pouring out. Melanie's betrayal, Scott's schemes, the financial disaster I'd discovered. Emily listened without interruption, her expression growing darker. When I finally fell silent, she reached across the table and squeezed my hand. I'm so sorry, Liam, but I can't say I'm entirely surprised. I looked up sharply. What do you mean? She withdrew her hand, wrapping it around her coffee cup. There's something you should know. Melanie and Scott, their relationship wasn't always appropriate. What are you saying? In college, before you met her, there were rumors. They're step-siblings, not blood relatives. Their parents married when they were teenagers. But the way they acted around each other... She shook her head. It didn't seem like a normal sibling relationship. The cafe seemed to tilt around me. Why didn't you tell me this when I started dating her? I tried to hint at it, but you were so taken with her. And honestly, I wasn't sure. It was just rumors and I had no proof. She paused. Until now, I guess. I need to see, I said abruptly. Emily frowned. See what? If you're right. If there's something between them. She nodded slowly, then pulled out her phone. After scrolling for a moment, she passed it to me. These are from Morgan's graduation party, before you met Melanie. I found them when I was digitizing old photos last year. The images showed a younger Melanie and Scott, his arm around her waist, her looking up at him with an expression I recognized all too well. It was the same look she had given me in our early days. Boston, I said, pushing the phone back to Emily. I've been offered a job in Boston. Her eyes widened. Are you going to take it? Yes, I replied, feeling suddenly lighter. And I think I might need a good lawyer there. Emily smiled. Well, that's convenient. I happen to run a law firm in Boston. I woke before dawn, my eyes opening to darkness with the immediate awareness that today would change everything. No more play acting, no more smiling through gritted teeth. Today was the day of reckoning. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. A text from Jason, my realtor. Documents signed. Money transferred to your private account. Congratulations. Beside me, Melanie slept peacefully, one hand tucked under her pillow, her breathing deep and regular. How could someone harbor such deception and still sleep so soundly? I studied her face in the dim light filtering through the curtains. The face I had once loved more than anything in the world. Now I felt nothing but a hollow ache where that love had been. I slipped out of bed quietly and dressed for work. In the kitchen, I prepared coffee as usual, going through the motions of normality one last time. When Melanie came downstairs, hair tousled from sleep, I handed her a cup and kissed her cheek. You're up early, she yawned, leaning against the counter. Big meeting today, I replied, the lie coming easily now. Might be late tonight. Don't wait up. She nodded absently, already scrolling through her phone. Scott's bringing the boys over to see the house this evening. I thought I'd order pizza. Sounds perfect, I said, grabbing my briefcase. Inside were the last of my important documents, removed from our home office the previous night while Melanie was bathing. I paused at the door, looking back at her. She didn't glance up, too engrossed in her phone. Have a good day, I said, wondering if she'd remember these as my final words to her. She murmured something in response, and then I was gone. Instead of going to work, I drove to my bank and met with the manager who helped me close all our joint accounts. I transferred the money to my new private accounts, accessible only to me. Next, I visited our credit card companies, canceling our shared cards and removing Melanie as an authorized user on my personal accounts. By noon, I had systematically dismantled our financial connection. The house sale proceeds were safely in my private account. My new apartment in Boston was secured with first and last month's rent paid. My resignation letter was drafted and ready to be sent. All that remained was the letter. I drove to a small cafe across town and opened my laptop. For an hour I typed, deleted, and retyped, trying to find the right words. How do you summarize the end of a marriage, the discovery of years of betrayal, in a single document? In the end I kept it direct. Melanie, by now you've likely discovered that our house has been sold. The money from our joint accounts is also gone, though not stolen, as I've only taken what was mine to begin with, minus the $85,000 you've secretly funneled to Scott over the years. I know everything. I overheard your conversation with Scott last week. I've seen the bank statements. I know about the identity theft, the credit fraud, and your attempt to sabotage my promotion. I know about your relationship with your brother, which Emily Winters was kind enough to clarify for me. I won't be coming back. Divorce papers will arrive within the week. Don't bother contesting anything. I have extensive documentation of the financial fraud, which I'm choosing not to take to the police as a final courtesy to you. You once told me you loved me. I wonder if that was ever true, or if I was just the human ATM who never asks questions, as Scott so eloquently put it. Goodbye, Liam. I printed the letter at a copy shop, along with copies of all the bank statements highlighting Melanie's withdrawals and a copy of the house sale contract. I placed them in a large envelope and drove back to what had been our home for the last time. The house was empty, just as I'd expected. Melanie would be at work for another few hours. I used my key to enter, feeling like a stranger in the space I had once called home. In the kitchen, I arranged my 3 items on the table: the envelope with the letter and documents, a copy of the credit report showing the fraud in my name, and my house key. I took one last look around, memories flashing through my mind, our first night here, painting the living room together, planning for a future that would never come. Then I walked out, closing the door firmly behind me. As I drove away, my phone rang. It was Daniel Archer. I've got the final report on Scott Thompson, he said. It's worse than we thought. He's been involved in investment scams before, targeting vulnerable people. And he's not alone. Your wife's accounting background has been useful to him. She's listed as a financial officer in several of his shell companies. Email me everything, I said. I'm heading to Boston tomorrow. Good luck, Archer replied. And Liam? Watch your back. People like this don't take kindly to having their schemes exposed. I spent the rest of the afternoon in my temporary apartment, finalizing arrangements for my move and sending my resignation email to Robert. I explained the situation, minus the personal details, and offered to help transition remotely. His response was understanding and supportive, even offering to expedite my start date in Boston. At 6 o'clock, my phone exploded with activity. A string of texts from Melanie, each more frantic than the last, followed by calls that I let go to voicemail. I listened to the first one, her voice hysterical, screaming about the house, the money, demanding explanations. I texted back a single line, "It's the price of betrayal. Good luck with Scott." Then I blocked her number and poured myself a drink. My new life was waiting. A week passed in the strange limbo of my temporary apartment. I'd taken to keeping the blinds drawn and ordering delivery rather than venturing out unnecessarily. Not that I was hiding exactly. But Boston was calling, and I saw no reason to entangle myself further in the wreckage of my former life. My phone, with a new number known only to Emily, Robert, and my new landlord in Boston, remained blissfully silent most of the time. My email, however, told a different story. The first official communication came on Tuesday morning, a formal letter from a law firm representing Melanie, demanding half the proceeds from the house sale and threatening legal action if I didn't comply. I forwarded it to Emily, who called me within the hour. "They don't have a leg to stand on," she said, her voice confident and reassuring. "The house was solely in your name and the sale was completely legal. They're just trying to intimidate you. Will it work?" I asked, staring out the window at the unfamiliar neighborhood below. "Not a chance," Emily replied. "The paperwork was airtight. She has no claim on the property or the proceeds." I exhaled slowly, tension releasing from shoulders I hadn't realized were knotted. "Thank you." Later that afternoon, my old colleague James called. I'd given him my new number as he was the only person at the office I truly trusted. "Dude, what the hell happened?" he asked without preamble. "Melanie showed up here yesterday completely unhinged. Security had to escort her out." My stomach dropped. "What was she doing?" "Looking for you, obviously. She was screaming about you stealing her money, selling her house. When Becky at reception told her you'd resigned, she lost it. Started throwing things, crying, making a scene. It was intense." I closed my eyes, picturing the chaos. "I'm sorry you had to deal with that." "Don't be sorry, man. Just tell me what's going on. Are you okay?" I gave him an abbreviated version of events: the financial deception, Scott's fraud, my escape plan. By the end, James was whistling low. "Holy shit. I always thought Melanie was, I don't know, controlling maybe. But this is next level." "You have no idea," I replied. After hanging up, I checked my email again to find a message from an unfamiliar address. The subject line read simply, "We need to talk." It was from Marjorie, Melanie's mother. Her message was brief, pleading, "Liam, whatever has happened, we can resolve this as a family. Please call me. Melanie is devastated and we're all worried about you." I deleted it without replying. 3 more similar messages arrived over the next 2 days. One from Tom, thinly veiling threats about consequences for my actions, and 2 more from Marjorie, each more desperate than the last. On Friday morning, Emily called again. "Liam, are you still at the Oakwood Apartments?" Something in her tone made me sit up straighter. "Yes, why?" "A client just left my office. He lives in that complex and mentioned seeing a man matching Scott's description asking questions at the front desk yesterday. Showing your picture around." A chill ran through me. How would he even know where to look? "I don't know, but I'd suggest moving to a hotel for your last few days there. Better safe than sorry." I took her advice, checking into an anonymous chain hotel near the interstate. That night, watching local news on the hotel television, I saw a familiar face in a police custody image. Scott Thompson, arrested for stalking and possession of an illegal firearm. The reporter's voice explained that he had been apprehended outside an apartment complex after residents reported suspicious behavior. When police searched him, they found an unregistered handgun and a photograph of a local resident. I sat frozen on the edge of the bed, the remote dangling from my fingers. Scott had come looking for me, armed. The reality of what might have happened if he'd found me sank in like a stone. My phone rang, Emily again. "Are you watching the news?" she asked without greeting. "Yes." "That was your apartment building. And the photo they found on him? It was you." I swallowed hard. "I figured as much." "It gets worse," she continued. "Scott was already on probation for a previous conviction. With the weapons charge and his prior record, he's looking at serious time." The next morning, as I was packing the last of my belongings for the drive to Boston, my phone rang with an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Is this Liam Reeves?" a female voice asked. Who's asking? Detective Sarah Morales with the County Police Department. I'm calling about Scott Thompson. My heart raced. What about him? We'd like you to come in and make a statement. Based on what we found in Mr. Thompson's possession, we believe you may have been the target of potential violence. I agreed to meet her that afternoon. The police station was cold and sterile, but Detective Morales was warm and professional as she recorded my statement about Scott's history of financial fraud using my identity and the recent breakdown of my marriage. Mr. Thompson will remain in custody, she assured me when we finished. Given his prior record and the nature of these charges, bail has been denied. As I stood to leave, she handed me her card. If Mrs. Reeves or anyone from her family attempts to contact you in a threatening manner, call me directly. On my way out, I passed a sobbing Melanie in the waiting area, flanked by her parents. Our eyes met briefly, hers red-rimmed and desperate, mine calm and detached. I walked past without a word, the door closing behind me with a satisfying click. That night, my last in town, I sent a single email to Melanie's address, forwarding all of Daniel Archer's findings about Scott's financial crimes. The subject line read simply, "He's yours now. You get to support him." The Massachusetts Turnpike unwound before me like a promise as I drove east toward Boston, my car packed with the distilled remains of my former life. Everything I truly valued fit into a sedan: clothes, books, a few photographs from before Melanie, and my grandfather's restored record collection. The rest I'd either sold or abandoned, too tainted by association to keep. Boston greeted me with a crisp spring morning, the city skyline crystalline against the cloudless blue sky. It felt like an omen, clear, bright, unburdened by the past. My new apartment overlooked the Charles River, a sleek one-bedroom in a modern building with floor-to-ceiling windows and none of the quaint touches Melanie had insisted upon in our suburban home. This place was entirely mine, chosen without compromise or consultation. Emily met me in the lobby, professional in a tailored suit but breaking into a warm smile when she saw me. "Welcome to Boston," she said, pulling me into a quick hug. "How was the drive?" "Therapeutic," I replied, surprised to find it was true. 8 hours of just me in the road. I did a lot of thinking. She helped me carry the last of my boxes upstairs, then ordered takeout while I unpacked the essentials. As we sat on my still-wrapped couch eating pad thai from the container, she updated me on the legal situation. "The divorce papers are filed," she said. "Given the circumstances and the evidence we have, it should be straightforward. Melanie's lawyer has already backed off the demands for the house proceeds. I think they realized how weak their position is." I nodded, relief washing through me. "And my identity theft case?" "The police are handling that separately. Scott will face those charges in addition to the weapons charges. He's looking at significant time." She hesitated, twirling noodles around her fork. "Are you sure you don't want to pursue charges against Melanie for her part in the financial fraud?" I considered this for a moment, then shook my head. "No. I just want to be done with all of it." The next morning, I walked into my new office at Harrington Technologies to find Robert waiting for me, grinning broadly. "Liam, welcome aboard." He shook my hand vigorously. "Tour's at 9, but I wanted to give you some news personally." I raised an eyebrow. "Good news, I hope?" "The board reviewed your portfolio again yesterday. They were so impressed that they've bumped you up another level. You'll be executive VP reporting directly to me." I blinked, stunned. "What? That's a significant promotion, yes. With compensation to match." Robert handed me a folder. "The details are all in here. Needless to say, we have high expectations." The day passed in a blur of introductions, meetings, and orientation sessions. By evening, I was exhausted but exhilarated. This new position would challenge me in ways my old job never had, pushing me to grow beyond the comfortable routine I'd settled into. As weeks turned into months, I found myself thriving. The divorce proceedings moved forward without complication, expedited by the financial evidence Emily had compiled. Melanie never contested anything, a fact that surprised me until Emily explained. "The evidence of financial fraud was overwhelming," she said over coffee one Saturday. "If she'd fought it, we could have pushed for criminal charges. She's cutting her losses." With Emily's guidance, I also joined a support group for survivors of relationship trauma. The first meeting was awkward. I was one of only 2 men in the circle of 12, but the stories I heard resonated deeply. Financial abuse, manipulation, gaslighting, patterns I recognized all too well. During my third meeting, a woman named Rebecca shared her story of escaping a husband who had systematically isolated her from friends and family while draining their savings for his gambling addiction. The hardest part wasn't leaving, she said, her voice steady despite the pain evident in her eyes. It was accepting that the person I loved never really existed. He was a fiction created to get what he wanted from me. After the meeting, we talked in the hallway, recognizing in each other the same process of rebuilding. Rebecca was warm, genuine, and refreshingly direct, qualities I now realized had been absent in my relationship with Melanie. As my new life took shape, I rediscovered parts of myself that had been dormant for years. I joined a rock climbing gym, picked up my guitar again, and started hiking the trails around Boston every weekend. Sometimes Rebecca joined me, our friendship growing naturally without pressure or expectation. 4 months after my arrival in Boston, I received a plain envelope with my former neighbor's return address. Inside was a brief note and a local newspaper clipping. "Thought you might want to know," the note read. "Hope you're doing well wherever you are." The clipping detailed Scott's sentencing: 5 years for multiple charges including weapons possession, stalking, and fraud. A smaller paragraph mentioned that Melanie Thompson had moved back in with her parents following financial difficulties. I folded the clipping and placed it in my desk drawer, feeling no satisfaction, no vindication, just a quiet relief that this chapter was truly closing. That evening, at a staff dinner celebrating our department's successful quarter, I surprised myself by volunteering to organize a fundraiser for a local nonprofit that helped victims of financial abuse. As I outlined my proposal, passion rising in my voice, I caught Robert nodding approvingly from across the table. "Sometimes the worst experiences give us our greatest purpose," he commented afterward. "You've turned your pain into something constructive." Walking home along the riverfront, I realized he was right. The betrayal that had shattered my world had also freed me from a life built on lies. For the first time in years, I was standing on solid ground, my ground, and the view from here was better than anything I'd imagined. "You're sure about this?" Rebecca asked, adjusting her scarf as we walked through the crowded streets of Manhattan. "We could easily change our dinner reservation to somewhere else." I squeezed her hand, appreciating her concern. "It's just a restaurant. The chances of running into anyone from my past here are astronomically small." We were spending the weekend in New York, a spontaneous getaway to celebrate my first year at Harrington Technologies and Rebecca's promotion at the education nonprofit where she worked. 1 year since I'd left my old life behind. 1 year of building something real. The restaurant was upscale without being pretentious, all warm lighting and exposed brick. The hostess led us to a corner table with a good view of both the open kitchen and the street outside. Perfect for people watching, one of Rebecca's favorite activities. "So," she said, unfolding her napkin, "are you going to tell me about this mysterious meeting Robert mentioned? The one you've been so tight-lipped about?" I smiled, savoring the moment. "Harrington is launching a foundation for financial literacy education. They want me to head it up, splitting my time between the corporate role and the foundation." Rebecca's eyes widened. "Liam, that's incredible. It's perfect for you." "It feels right," I admitted. "Using what I've learned to help others avoid similar situations." Our conversation flowed easily over appetizers and wine, touching on everything from work to the hiking trail we planned to tackle the next morning. Being with Rebecca was effortless. No hidden agendas, no eggshells to walk on. Just two people genuinely enjoying each other's company. I was in the middle of a story about my latest rock climbing mishap when Rebecca's expression suddenly changed. Her eyes fixed on something over my shoulder, and her hand found mine across the table. "Don't turn around," she said quietly, "but I think I just saw your former in-laws." Despite her warning, I couldn't help glancing back. Sure enough, at a table across the restaurant sat Tom and Marjorie Thompson. They hadn't changed much. Tom still broad-shouldered and imposing, Marjorie still meticulously put together. They appeared to be arguing in hushed tones. "What are the odds?" I murmured, turning back to Rebecca. "Should we leave?" She studied me carefully. "Do you want to?" I considered it, surprised to discover I felt more curiosity than dread. "No. I'm not running from my past anymore." We continued our meal, though I was acutely aware of the Thompsons' presence. About halfway through our entrees, I saw Tom stand abruptly and head toward the exit, his face flushed with anger. Marjorie remained at the table, shoulders slumped in what looked like defeat. "Trouble in paradise," Rebecca observed quietly. I nodded, focusing back on my food. A few minutes later, movement in my peripheral vision caught my attention. Marjorie was approaching our table, her steps hesitant but determined. She looked older than I remembered, fine lines etched around her eyes and mouth that makeup couldn't hide. When she reached us, she paused as if gathering courage. "Liam," she said finally, her voice strained. I thought that was you. I stood, manners ingrained too deeply to ignore. Marjorie. This is Rebecca. Marjorie nodded at Rebecca but kept her attention on me. I won't intrude on your evening. She twisted her wedding ring nervously. I wanted to apologize. We were wrong about so many things and we treated you terribly. The sincerity in her voice surprised me. Thank you, I said simply. She glanced toward the door where Tom had exited. Tom and I are separating. After everything with Melanie and Scott, and learning what they'd been doing all those years. She shook her head. It was too much strain. Too many lies. I didn't know what to say, so I remained silent. I always suspected something wasn't right between them, she continued, her voice dropping. The way they were together. But I chose not to see it. She fumbled in her purse and pulled out a small velvet box. I found this among Melanie's things when she moved back home. I believe it was your grandfather's. She placed the box on the table. Inside was my grandfather's pocket watch, a family heirloom I'd thought lost years ago. Melanie took it, Marjorie explained, unable to meet my eyes. She said Scott needed money and it was valuable. I found it hidden in her jewelry box and kept it. I couldn't let her sell it. I stared at the watch, memories flooding back of my grandfather showing me how to wind it, explaining how it had survived 2 wars and the Great Depression. Thank you, I said, genuinely moved. This means a lot to me. Marjorie nodded, then hesitated. Perhaps we could stay in touch? I'd like to. I think it's best we don't, I interrupted gently but firmly. But I appreciate you returning this. She accepted this with a sad nod and turned to leave, then paused. She's not doing well, Liam? Melanie. She's different now. I'm sorry to hear that, I replied truthfully. But that's not my concern anymore. After Marjorie left, Rebecca reached across the table to squeeze my hand. You okay? I opened the watch, running my thumb over the engraved initials inside the cover. Better than okay, I said, surprising myself with how true it felt. That was closure I didn't know I needed. We finished our dinner talking about the watch and the stories my grandfather had told me. The weight of the Thompsons' presence had lifted, leaving only the pleasure of the evening and the company. Back in Boston the following week, I sent Marjorie a brief note thanking her again for returning the watch. It felt like the final period at the end of a long, complicated sentence, acknowledging what had happened while firmly closing the book. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon as I was reviewing quarterly projections for the foundation. Daniel Archer's name flashed on my phone screen, a ghost from my past life I hadn't heard from in nearly 18 months. Liam Reeves, I answered, curiosity piqued. Mr. Reeves, it's Daniel Archer. His voice was exactly as I remembered, precise, professional, detached. I apologize for contacting you after all this time, but something's come up that I thought you should know about. I leaned back in my chair, gazing out at the Boston skyline. I'm listening. I've been tracking Scott Thompson as part of another case. It seems he's been involved in more serious criminal activities than we initially uncovered. Securities fraud, document forgery, a Ponzi scheme targeting elderly investors. My stomach tightened. What does this have to do with me? Your ex-wife was involved. Archer's voice remained neutral, stating facts without judgment. She was using her accounting skills to cook the books, create false statements, mislead investors. I believe some of this activity was happening during your marriage. The implications hit me like a physical blow. If these crimes occurred while we were married, I could potentially be implicated. I'm sending you the full report, Archer continued. You might want to consider taking this to the authorities yourself, to make it clear you had no knowledge or involvement. After we hung up, I sat motionless, staring at the comprehensive file Archer had emailed. Pages of evidence, financial records, connections that stretched back years. Some dated to when Melanie and I were still together, living in what I thought was a normal marriage. I called Emily immediately. Within an hour, she was in my office, reviewing the documents with a grim expression. You need to get ahead of this, she said finally, closing her laptop. I have contacts at the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. We should present this information voluntarily, make it clear you're coming forward as soon as you learned about it. The next morning we sat in a federal building, explaining the situation to 2 agents with impassive faces and keen eyes. I provided everything, Archer's reports, my own banking records, the timeline of my discovery and divorce. We're already familiar with Mr. Thompson's operations, the senior agent said after reviewing our materials. This adds some valuable connections we weren't aware of. Thank you for coming forward, Mr. Reeves. 2 weeks later, the news broke across local media. Local woman arrested in connection with multi-million-dollar fraud scheme. The accompanying photograph showed Melanie being led to a police car, her face partially obscured as she tried to hide from the cameras. I watched the coverage from my apartment, feeling strangely hollow. There was no satisfaction in seeing her downfall, only a profound sadness that someone I had once loved had fallen so far. The full details emerged in subsequent days. Scott had been running sophisticated investment scams for years, targeting vulnerable retirees with promises of exceptional returns. Melanie had created the false documentation that made these schemes appear legitimate, using her accounting expertise to fabricate convincing financial statements. "The evidence is overwhelming," Emily told me over dinner at her place, where she'd invited me and Rebecca to discuss the case. "She's facing 18 months minimum in a federal facility, plus significant financial penalties." Rebecca squeezed my hand under the table. "How are you doing with all this?" "I'm okay," I said, surprised to find it was true. "It feels distant now, like it happened to someone else." My phone rang, a number I didn't recognize. I excused myself to answer it. "Liam? It's Tom. Thompson." I nearly hung up, but something in his voice, a desperation I'd never heard before, made me listen. "What do you want, Tom?" "It's about Melanie," he said, his voice breaking. "Her bail hearing is tomorrow. We need money for the bond. I've sold my car, but it's not enough. Please, Liam. I know we have no right to ask, but—" "You're right," I interrupted. "You have no right to ask. She's still your wife." "Ex-wife," I corrected. "And she made her choices, Tom. Now she has to face the consequences." "You heartless bastard," he hissed, his desperation turning to rage. "After everything—" I ended the call, blocking the number immediately. Emily was watching me when I returned to the table. "Tom?" I nodded. "Asking for bail money. Apparently, Marjorie's selling their house to pay for Melanie's defense." "Not your problem," Rebecca said firmly. "No," I agreed. "Not anymore." In the following weeks, I found myself drawn deeper into the Foundation's work. We partnered with Emily's firm to create a support system for victims of Scott and Melanie's schemes, many of whom were elderly people who had lost their life savings. The work was challenging but deeply rewarding, giving purpose to my own painful experience. A publisher approached me about writing a book detailing my experience and providing guidance for others in similar situations. I declined politely but firmly. "My story isn't special," I told Rebecca as we discussed the offer over dinner. "And I don't want to be defined by what happened to me." "So what do you want to be defined by?" she asked, her eyes warm in the candlelight. I considered the question seriously. "By what I build next. By moving forward, not looking back." The trial was brief, the evidence too substantial for any real defense. Melanie pleaded guilty to reduced charges in exchange for testimony against others involved in Scott's schemes. The local paper ran a small article about her sentencing, 18 months in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised release and restitution payments to the victims. I read the article once, then closed the browser and turned back to the Foundation's new educational program outline on my screen. The past was finished. My focus remained on the future. Sunday morning sunshine streamed through the wide windows of our suburban Boston home, casting warm patterns across the hardwood floor of our kitchen. I stood on the terrace, coffee mug in hand, watching a pair of cardinals dart between the oak trees that bordered our backyard. 5 years had transformed not just my life but my entire sense of self. "Pancakes are almost ready," Rebecca called from inside. "How many do you want?" I smiled, turning to watch my wife expertly flip golden circles on the griddle, her other hand resting on the gentle swell of her stomach. 6 months pregnant, she glowed with a serene happiness that still caught me off guard sometimes. A reminder of how fortunate I was. 2 is perfect, I answered, stepping back inside. "Need any help?" She passed me the maple syrup and a stack of plates. "You can set the table. I'm thinking we should hike the Blue Hills Trail later if the weather holds. Good practice for carrying extra weight." We moved around each other with the easy rhythm of people who had built a life together deliberately, thoughtfully. No secrets, no hidden agendas, just 2 people who had found each other after separate journeys through disappointment and betrayal. The doorbell rang as I was arranging silverware on the table. "I'll get it," I said, setting down the forks. A courier stood on our front step, holding a padded envelope. "Delivery for Liam Reeves," he said, handing me an electronic pad to sign. I examined the envelope as I walked back to the kitchen. It had been forwarded from my old office address with no return name, just a postmark from a small town I didn't recognize. "What is it?" Rebecca asked, bringing the pancakes to the table. Not sure, I replied, opening the envelope carefully. Inside was a handwritten letter on plain paper. The neat, familiar handwriting sent an unexpected jolt through me, Melanie's distinctive script, unchanged after all these years. It's from Melanie, I said, my voice carefully neutral. Rebecca paused, then sat down. Are you going to read it? I nodded, unfolding the pages. Dear Liam, I don't expect a response to this letter, and I understand if you choose to throw it away unread. After everything that happened, I have no right to ask for your time or attention. I was released from federal prison 3 months ago. I'm working as a waitress in a small diner now, trying to rebuild some kind of life while making my restitution payments. It's hardly the future I once imagined, but it's honest work, perhaps the first truly honest thing I've done in many years. I'm writing not to ask forgiveness, what I did is unforgivable, but to acknowledge the pain I caused you. In prison, I had a lot of time to think about the person I became and the choices I made. There's no excuse for any of it. The lies, the theft, the betrayal of your trust. You deserved none of it. Scott is back in prison. He lasted 6 months on the outside before returning to his old ways. Some people never change, I suppose. I finally accepted that he was never the person I pretended he was, and our relationship was built on mutual exploitation rather than love. My parents have separated permanently. Dad wants nothing to do with me anymore. Mom calls occasionally, but there's too much damage there to repair. I've lost everything, Liam, my family, my career, my self-respect. The irony is that I now understand the value of what I threw away with you, the only genuine relationship I ever had. I'm not writing to burden you with my regrets or to insert myself back into your life. I simply wanted you to know that I recognize the harm I caused and I am truly sorry. You were a good man who deserved far better than what I gave you. I hope you found happiness and peace. You more than anyone I've known deserve it. Melanie. I folded the letter carefully and returned it to the envelope, my emotions surprisingly steady. There was no anger, no reopened wound, just a distant acknowledgement of a chapter that had long since closed. Rebecca watched me thoughtfully. Bad news? No, I said, placing the envelope in a drawer. Just echoes from the past. Nothing important now. She studied my face. Are you sure you're okay? I reached across the table for her hand, my wedding band catching the sunlight. I'm more than okay. I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. We ate our breakfast, the conversation shifting naturally to names for the baby. We'd narrowed it down to Emma or Jacob, and plans for the nursery. The letter retreated to the background of my thoughts, as insubstantial as a fading dream. After breakfast, I stepped back onto the terrace, filling my lungs with the crisp autumn air. Our neighborhood stretched before me, a community we'd chosen together, where we'd put down roots and built connections. In the distance, children played in a nearby park, their laughter carrying on the breeze. Rebecca joined me, slipping her arm around my waist. Penny, for your thoughts? I was just thinking about how life works out, I said, wrapping my arm around her shoulders. How sometimes the worst things that happen to us lead to the best places. She nodded, understanding without needing further explanation. That was one of the countless things I loved about her. The quiet depth of her empathy, the way she could share a silence comfortably. New day, I said, turning toward the sun. Our day. The words felt right, an acknowledgement that each morning brought fresh possibilities, unburdened by the past. This home, this life we'd created together, was genuinely mine in ways my previous house had never been. Not just legally but emotionally. A place built on truth, respect, and love that wasn't contingent on performance or profit. The scars from my past remained, but they had healed into something constructive. Wisdom that guided my choices, compassion that informed my work, gratitude that colored each day. I had sold a house 5 years ago, but in doing so, I'd found my way home.